Good evening to all the viewers of Mpumakapa TV and the listeners of Nkqubela FM. My name is Yongamela Manene from Amaqhawe A2, the foundation that seeks to recognize and appreciate the struggles of the unmentioned heroes, the struggles of the forgotten heroes, those that are living and those that has passed. We have been doing these lectures continuously, but today we have a different one. We're not doing a lecture, we're doing a discussion. We are discussing very, very, very important aspect in human life, the healing process, the healing of the soul, the healing of the being, the healing of the society. And today we are having someone who has lived and who is living on daily basis that message of healing. I'm hosting Father Mike Lapsley from the Anglican Church, as well as the Society for Sacred Mission. He has a better story to tell about healing as he is living that process. He has an experience that many of us, being South Africans, have not experienced, where he took a big sacrifice in order to fight for this freedom. He is one of our heroes that we recognize. He is also an active member, not born in South Africa, but born through South African oppression. We are hosting Father Lapsley and wish that you can listen to his story and wish that you can hear. Father Lapsley, welcome.
Happy to be with you, my brother, and with your viewers and listeners.
For now, what is going to happen? As I said, it's a different presentation at all. We're going to listen to this clip of the story of Father Lapsley so that you can hear it for yourselves before we start our conversation.
Alan Michael Lapsley was born in New Zealand on June 2nd, 1949.
I was born and brought up in New Zealand, this very small country. And my parents, in terms of a developed country, were quite poor. So I remember hard work, lack of money, but not poverty in the sense of ever having gone to bed hungry. Both my parents were loving, committed Christians, so I was brought up very much in a church environment, and was, since I was a child, was quite a religious child and interested in issues of faith.
His interest in issues of faith grew into a calling, and at the age of 17 he traveled to Australia to become a priest in the Anglican Church.
At the end of high school, I went to begin my training to be a priest. In some ways, when I look back, it's quite amazing that they actually permitted me at the age of 17 to leave the country, go to another country, and to train to be a priest.
Michael Lapsley joined the Anglican religious community in Australia in 1967. In 1971, he took his vows in the Society of the Sacred Mission. Lapsley was ordained as a priest in 1973. In that same year, the community chose to transfer him to South Africa to enroll in undergraduate studies in the city of Durban. It was in South Africa that Father Michael's life would be changed forever.
Nothing prepared me for South Africa. I had read and read and read, and yet I'd understood nothing as I look back. And I suppose I thought that when I arrived in South Africa, I'd find three groups of people: the oppressed, the oppressor, and, if you like, the human race that I would belong to. And I often say that when I arrived in South Africa, I stopped being a human being and I became a white man. Because from the moment of my arrival, every single aspect of my life was decided by the color of my skin.
Fate landed Father Michael in South Africa during the height of the apartheid repression and escalating violence. Far from being an ordinary student, his appointment as chaplain to both white students and black students on 3 campuses gave him a unique perspective.
I wasn't simply living in this white cocoon of white privilege, but I was seeing day by day and relating to people who were at the receiving end of racial oppression. And feeling its wrongness and its injustice.
For Father Michael, this would be a test of faith. What does a man of God do in the face of injustice?
From earliest childhood, had an understanding of Christianity that meant that all human beings were made in God's image and likeness. All human beings had value simply because we're human. My experience from the day I arrived in South Africa was this was the very opposite of Christianity, because here was a society in which all value derived from the color of your skin, not from the commonness of your humanity.
While theological questions of right and wrong, good and evil, swirled in his mind, Father Michael was faced with a very practical question of which side was he on, the oppressed or the oppressor?
In a way, I suppose, from the beginning, I guess I had, in a crude sense, 2 choices: beat them or join them. And I guess in my heart of hearts, I decided to beat them. Ever increasingly, my life became committed to ending that system.
Over the next 3 years, Father Michael spoke out against the injustices of apartheid and became active in the anti-apartheid movement. It all came to a head in 1976 when school children began to protest having to learn their lessons in Afrikaans, and the fact that the education they were receiving was inferior.
During that period of more than a year, more than 1,000 school children were shot in the streets of South Africa. And then vast numbers were detained, imprisoned, tortured. Shortly after that, I was then expelled from South Africa. I had begun to speak out against the killing of children, but also against the torture and the detention of students and young people. But when I was expelled, there was no formal reason given. And so then, in agreement with my community, I went to live in Lesotho, where my community had also been working for a long time.
After being expelled in September of 1976, Father Michael moved to Lesotho, where he continued his studies and joined the African National Congress. He became one of the chaplains to the ANC in exile.
Philosophically, ideologically, theologically, I was immensely attracted immediately to the ANC. The stumbling block was that I was a committed pacifist, and the ANC, after 50 years of non-violent struggle, had actually opted for arms. But the killing of school children pushed me over the edge, and I began to say, in this context, as a last resort, when all other options, all other avenues are closed, people do have a right to defend themselves. And so, if you like, the last hurdle had been crossed that made it possible for me to join the African National Congress of South Africa.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
In 1982, 100 South African commandos raided the city of Maseru, Lesotho, in search of ANC members who were believed to be in hiding. 42 people were killed, including 5 women and 2 children. After the attack, Father Michael moved to Zimbabwe.
As years passed, we became the hunted. By the time I left Lesotho, you never drove a car without looking underneath it to see whether a bomb had been placed there.
It was in Zimbabwe in 1990, 3 months after ANC leader Nelson Mandela's release from prison, that Father Michael was sent a letter bomb by the apartheid regime. It was hidden inside of 2 religious magazines. He lost both hands and sight in one eye in the blast and was seriously burned.
We know that it was part of the machinery of the apartheid state. It wasn't an individual act, but it was part of the machineries of death of the apartheid state that endured beyond 1990.
The act of opening the magazine was the detonating device for a bomb. I can still remember what happened. The actual explosion, it's still something with me. I remember pain of a scale that I didn't think a human being could ever experience. I remember going into darkness, being thrown backwards by the force of the bomb. The exact angle saved my life that I opened it. I opened it on a small coffee table. If I'd opened it in something like this, a table like this, it would have killed me because it would have knocked out the heart or knocked off the head. I've always been clear that the person I hold responsible ultimately for my bombing is F.W. de Klerk. I've said that I'm not filled with hatred or bitterness or self-pity, nor that I want revenge. I think what I believe in is not retribution. I believe in restorative justice. If F.W. was to come to me, or the person who made the bomb was to come to me and said, I'm sorry for what I did, and I want your forgiveness, and this is what I am now doing in the way of reparation, not to me personally, but to our country and our people. These are the kinds of things I'm doing to heal our land. Then of course one would say, of course, yes, forgiveness. There would not be a problem about that.
Father Michael returned to South Africa in 1992. He became the chaplain of the Trauma Center for Victims of Violence and Torture in Cape Town. The center assisted South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was there that he became aware of the tremendous healing power of telling your story.
All South Africans had been damaged by their experience of the apartheid years, no matter what side they were on. Also that all of us had a story to tell. All of us carried stuff inside of us as a consequence of the journey the nation had traveled.
This work led to the founding of the Institute for the Healing of Memory in 1998.
This workshop is a journey. It's a journey that is going to focus not so much on what we think, but on what we feel.
He started giving workshops that enable South Africans of all races to tell their stories of pain and trauma.
Your heroic determination.
Your commitment to justice. Viva!
It helped me to open up. I think it's there that I managed to say things that I never even told my mother.
I was able to express myself
my story, my feelings. And for the first time, somebody was listening.
I cried for all the pain of the apartheid that affected my life. I cried because of all the anger.
I could put my arm on the shoulder of people that I've never been so close to before. And that, for me as a white person, it meant a tremendous lot to me.
Father Michael soon realized that telling these stories in a safe, supportive environment helped to start the process of healing. He believes that the entire human family is burdened with trauma of one kind or another because of what we've done, what was done to us, and what we have failed to do. Therefore, everyone, young and old, rich and poor, could benefit by telling their story. Father Michael now travels throughout Africa, Europe, North America, and the South Pacific, giving healing of memory workshops to help heal the world one story at a time.
At some point in everybody's life, there's some kind of trauma from which they need to heal. But where people have been particularly oppressed, where people have gone through situations of war or oppression, then there is an even greater need for healing to take place. And so human beings everywhere need to find the way of detoxifying, if you like, vomiting out the poison of the things that have happened to them, so that they may indeed integrate into their lives what has happened, but also lead free, fulfilling, and whole lives.
As you have seen for yourselves, as you have watched for yourselves, these clips that have been compiled about the story of Father Lapse, I'm touched and I'm moved by this story. But fortunately, as I said earlier, we have Father Lapse, phakathi kwethu. He is going to be sharing with us about how he feels about being a South African and many other aspects about the ordeal that he has suffered. Welcome back again, Father Lapse. Thank you for availing yourself.
Thank you.
I need to ask you a question just before we get into as an intro. In Xhosa, we have a saying that "Sichaya lenkundla," meaning that we are just sweeping the grounds for the main beast. Father Lapsi, you are a priest, an ordained priest.
Yes.
And
an Anglican priest, member of an Anglican religious order that you mentioned in your intro, the Society of the Sacred Mission.
And you are also a freedom fighter. How do you mix these two? The clip tells us the story, but I want you to tell the people, a priest and a freedom fighter. Were you having an AK-47 or were you having a Bible?
Well, I think it's all about the relationship between faith and justice. And there's in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament tells us in Micah 6:8, what are we called to do? To do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And then, of course, when Jesus describes his own mission, he quotes the book of Isaiah and says, I have come to preach good news to the poor, liberty to the captives, sight to the blind, and to bind up the brokenhearted. So faith and justice are really two sides of the same coin. And of course, equally in the Hebrew scriptures, people are told, they say in Hosea and Amos, they say, God says, your worship stinks because you are oppressing the poor. So I think early on in my life, I discovered that relationship between faith and justice. But also, the message of Jesus is about freedom. It is about liberation. It is about reaching our God-given destiny to be fully human. But of course, if we know, and we know in the history of our struggle that it's not accidental that the first three presidents of the ANC were ministers of religion. So they had read the Bible, they had read the kinds of quotes that I'm just giving from you. At the same time, they were experiencing political oppression. So they, as faith leaders, realized that they needed to act politically in order to achieve the freedom for the nation. So I think in that sense, I come in a very long tradition. And of course, I was inspired by Isitwalandwe, Trevor Huddleston, who I read as a child in New Zealand, who was the person who alerted the Western world to what was happening in South Africa. But right up to the figures of Ambrose Reeve, Desmond Tutu, there have always been people of faith who played a key role in our struggle for freedom. And I think also apartheid was a kind of blasphemy because it turned the Bible upside down. In the Bible, we learn we're all God's children. We're all equal. We all have value. We all have something of the divine in us. And apartheid said the most important thing about you is the color of your skin. Now, that both couldn't be true. One of them had to be a lie. So, of course, some of us realized that apartheid was based on a lie about the people that God made us all to be. But often, you say the Bible or the AK-47, it's true as a freedom fighter, as part of the struggle. But my brother, Yongamela, I can confess to you today that the only automatic weapon I ever used in my life was my tongue. So the regime was a little bit stupid because eventually they bombed me, they took away my hands, which I did not need for shooting, and they left my weapon, my tongue, working quite well.
Wow. I'm answered. Indeed, your weapon was your tongue. You shot from your mouth, if I'm correct.
Exactly.
The second question, Father. You were not born a South African. You were born in New Zealand, but the struggle gave your South African birth, if I may put it.
Right, right.
So you had every right to sit there and read your Bible and shoot with your mouth and do nothing. But you chose, being a New Zealander, to fight for South Africans. You chose, being a minister called to serve in the church, but you chose the people of South Africa. And in South Africa, according to the clip, you were banished or chased out of South Africa.
Right, right.
But you remain the fighter for South Africa. You could have gone and say, I'm going back to Wellington. That's where I'm born. I'm not gonna, there we are. We are human beings. I don't want to be a white man, but you chose to fight. What was the reason for you to do that?
I think going back a couple of steps.
But now,
yeah, I mean, firstly, my introduction to South Africa is very interesting. As a kid of about 9, 10 years old in New Zealand, our priest brought a petition to our church, and the petition was no Maoris, no tour, because the Springboks had invited the All Blacks to come and play in South Africa, providing that they left the Maori people, the indigenous people of New Zealand, behind. And so that was my first introduction to South Africa. And so it was an issue of rugby, faith, racism, injustice, all tied up in one piece. But it's true, I never imagined that my life would be tied to the people of South Africa. And then, of course, later, as an adolescent, I read Trevor Huddleston's Naught for Your Comfort, the story of Sophiatown. And that had a deep impact on me. But still, I never imagined that I would come to South Africa. So then I went to the monastery. I trained to be a priest in Australia. And the religious order I belonged to, the Society of the Sacred Mission, had been working in South Africa since 1902, mainly in the Free State and also in Lesotho. And so after I was ordained as a priest, my community decided to send me to South Africa. So I came under the vow of obedience. But you know, Yongimela, I think when I arrived in South Africa, I thought I was going to find 3 groups of people: the oppressed, the oppressors, and a third group called the human race that I would belong to. And of course, I quickly discovered that because of the color of my skin, I was a beneficiary of apartheid. I was part of the oppressor group. So I could choose to oppose apartheid, but I was still choosing from the side of those who were its beneficiaries. And I think I said it in the film, when I arrived in South Africa, I stopped being a human being, I became a white man, because suddenly every part of my life was decided by the color of my skin. So for me, whiteness became like leprosy. I thought if I washed often enough, the whiteness would come off and I could be a human being again. So for me, joining the liberation struggle was not in a sense saying, I'm going to do something for Black people, but it was about my liberation, about my journey to freedom, in solidarity with people, Black people struggling for their own basic human rights.
Yes, it was to identify yourself with the human race. That's what I heard in the
exactly precisely. Yeah.
And indeed, you chose that to an extent, you were chased out and you went to continue with the struggle in June
I think also, there's
1970.
another point, Yongamela. One of the criticisms the regime made, they said there are some people who come from other countries and they get involved, and from their point of view, meddle in the issues of South Africa. Then if things get tough, they grab their passport and they run away. And I realized that if I was to have a right to participate in the struggle to free South Africa, my commitment had to be complete. It had to be lifelong. So yes, they expelled me, but the struggle continued. And of course, I went to the mountain kingdom of Lesotho, where we used to say we lived in the valley of the Munster. And then after a massacre there, I was expelled from Lesotho, and I had to, then I came back to Zimbabwe, which is where I lived up until 1992.
Yes, Father. Now you've made your choice and you've made your fights. You use your tongue to fight. And that has left you injured. That has left you physically damaged. That has left you with scars that are visible. That has not stopped you from fighting. Because why I'm saying it has not stopped you from fighting, you found another mission thereafter that needs to be addressed. And in finding that mission, or in finding that reason for you to fight again, using no weapons but your tongue, and using your calling to help others. Can you share with us how did that come about?
Well, you know, as we've seen in the film, back in 1990, I received a letter bomb hidden inside the pages of 2 religious magazines. Now, clearly that was a bomb that was not supposed to injure, it was supposed to kill, but God had other plans. And so, of course, I survived. But for the 14 years before the bomb went off, I had lived in the countries of Southern Africa, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, but I had traveled the world as part of the struggle against apartheid. And my mission as part of the ANC in particular was to mobilize the faith community to be against apartheid. And I used to say very simply, apartheid was an option or a choice for death carried out in the name of the gospel of life. So when I was bombed, people all over the world sent me messages of prayer, love, support. And that prayer, that love and support from Christians, from Muslims, from Hindus, from Jews, from atheists, from communists, that all helped me to see that if I was filled with hatred and bitterness and desire for revenge, that I would be a victim forever. They would have failed to kill the body, but they would have killed the soul. So God, through that prayer and love and support, enabled me to travel a journey from being a victim, which I was, something terrible had happened to me, to being a survivor. I am a survivor, I'm still alive, but to take the next step, the step of victory, to no longer be a prisoner of what had been done to me, to, if you like, to take back agency. You know, Yongamela, if you think of life being like a river, the river flows, something terrible happens. Easily our life becomes like a whirlpool. We live life in terms of that terrible incident. But then when healing begins, the river begins to flow. We take back our ability to contribute, to help shape the world. Now, I came back to South Africa in 1992. I've been away for 16 years. And I discovered a damaged nation, a nation damaged in our humanity, damaged by what we've done, by what has been done to us, and by what we failed to do. And each of us with a story to tell. But for millions of South Africans, unlike me, their stories had not been acknowledged and reverenced and recognized. No one had said, and what happened to you was wrong. So for many South Africans, all we had was our victimhood. So I realized that, yes, we would have to create jobs and health and education and water and electricity, but we'd have to deal with the soul. We had to deal with what had happened inside of us. We had to deal with our hatred and bitterness. And so just as people across the world accompanied me on my journey of healing, I realized I needed to create processes where other people could tell their stories, deal with what's in their hearts, detoxify. And so they too could take back agency. They too could continue to contribute. Now we call that process the healing of the memories. And back in 1998, we created an institute for healing of memories, safe and sacred spaces where people could tell their stories, listen to each other, and begin to deal with what they had inside them.
Wow. Father, your explanation has brought up another question from your side, where you say we are a nation of victims. We are, or how I interpret it in my mind, is we are a nation of, we are a damaged nation. You even
a wounded nation.
And you even mentioned it that on the clip, that across the line, it's not only about blacks, it's not about whites. Everybody is damaged. And the second one that you just mentioned is that, yes, we have a duty to create jobs, to deliver houses, health, and all the services required after liberation. But it is important also to heal the nation. Does it mean without proper healing, nothing can go on?
Well, I remember when I was in Rwanda after the genocide, a woman called Esther said to me, she said, you know, those of us who were survivors of the genocide, and this woman was a widow, her husband had been killed in the genocide. She said, you know, many of us are dead alive. She said, you know, we get up in the morning, we have our breakfast, we go to work, but inside we're dead because of what we've experienced. And she spoke of the journey of healing as the journey from being dead alive to becoming alive. Or if I can put it another way, when I spoke of myself, I talk about the journey from victim to survivor to victor. But there's another journey that often people travel when they have been hurt, and that is where victims become victimizers. And we see this as one of the men who have been deeply hurt end up hurting their intimate partners. Their rage and bitterness, there's no enemy to shoot at anymore. So they either go into attacking others closest to them, often their intimate partners or their children, or to themselves, alcohol, drugs, suicide. So the victim becomes the victimizer of self. So healing is about how do we break that cycle? And this is true of individuals, it's true of communities, it's true of nations. And it's perhaps in a sense, the first step to healing is saying, yeah, I've been damaged by the journey that I've traveled. And of course, some of us have been freedom fighters, but that doesn't mean we were not damaged as well. You know, sometimes we say, "Oh, comrade, you're a hero." Well, of course, that is true, but there may also be things you did of which you are ashamed as well, that we need the space to be able to deal with. Heroism is only part of the story. It doesn't speak to the fullness of our humanity. And in the process of seeking to free ourselves, we did terrible things. And things which in our private moments, late at night, all alone, we are still haunted by. And that's why we need those safe spaces where it's okay, yes, to be brave, but also to be vulnerable.
Wow. Father, this is a good message. As you've mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, our foundation seeks to recognize everybody that has been affected. One of our missions is to have a drive of practical reconciliation, where we say whatever has happened throughout these years is now affecting our society. There's a anger that is flying, which we experience or we see through your protests. People are, it talks to what you're talking about. People are damaging themselves now. They burn the clinics, they burn the streets, they throw down the lights that are meant to protect them. And it's all over.
We become enemies of ourselves.
Yes. How, from a societal perspective and communities, how do we bring everybody on board into this journey?
I think it always begins with self.